Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of PLA with myself and Nick. And today we've got a special guest by the name of Levendal, who is a junior associate here at Bruno Simao Attorneys. She specializes in evictions and has quite a vast knowledge on lease agreements. We've got two questions today. Nick will be taking the first one, and then we'll jump on the second one with Alexa. Nick, the first question goes, and it comes back from one of our estate agents that we deal with. She states that, please can you advise as to what the consequences would be if a tenant were not to give notice by the owner or agency 40 or 80 days prior to the expiry of the lease? Secondly to that, what would then be the consequences if the tenant on the third day of that month gave notice to vacate at the end of that same month, being the date of which the lease was due to expire? So Nick, perhaps you can just go deeply into there as to notice periods and this question, please.
Perfect. Okay, so what they're talking about here is when a parties enter into a fixed term lease agreement, okay, you know, the lease agreement starts on a particular date, that's recorded within the lease agreement. It ends on a particular date, that's also recorded within the lease agreement, okay, so it's for a fixed term. What the provisions of Rental Housing Act say is when the fixed term of that lease agreement is coming to an end, there's an obligation on the owner of the property, the landlord in the circumstances, to give a notice to the tenant, okay, the occupant in the property, 40 to 80 business days before the termination date, so the last date of the lease agreement, which indicates, okay, whether the lease agreement is going to be renewed and if there are going to be any changes to the lease agreement in the circumstances. Okay, so it's just prior notice that the tenant is supposed to receive to say, look, the lease agreement's coming to an end. I'm going to extend it for, you know, the same period that the initial term was, and your rental is going to increase by an amount, you know, or there's going to be some other change to whatever terms have been included in the written lease agreement. Okay. The tenant then has the ability to accept or reject what's going on in that notice. Okay. The consequence of not giving such a notice, okay, is that the lease agreement as it stands is assumed to continue, okay, on a month-to-month basis. So if that notice isn't given and you hit the termination date and you haven't let the tenant know about anything, it's just going to continue on a month-to-month basis thereafter. Okay, so there's no fixed term and you can't do any real material changes to the lease agreement at that point. It's going to be exactly what was agreed to in the first instance. Okay, and generally when you have a lease agreement, you're going to have a clause which relates to what percentage increase is going to happen on your rental charges or whatever else. So if there is a clause to that effect, you know, say it says your rental is going to increase by 6%, that 6% increase will probably apply at that point. All right. So the consequences of not giving the notice, month-to-month basis. All right. Then the second question in this is the tenant is now given an indication on the third of the month that that they don't intend to continue leasing the premises. And if I understand the question correctly, they're basically giving the notice during the last month of occupation, during the fixed term period. Okay. Now, there's no obligation on the tenant to give any sort of notice of acceptance or rejection in circumstances. So the fact that they're now saying, look, I'm not going to continue with it, you know, in the circumstances is fine. That will essentially bring the lease agreement to an end upon the termination date of the fixed term agreement. Absolutely perfect. Okay. The lease agreement will then no longer continue on a month-to-month basis because there's been a clear indication that they don't intend to lease the premises any longer. The answer would be very different if it were after the fixed term period, because then the lease agreement is already running on a month-to-month basis, and then a full calendar month needs to be given. But in this circumstance, because it's still in the fixed term period, there's no problem. The lease agreement would be brought to an end at the end of the fixed term.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Nick, for answering that question.